set your thoughts aside. 'Cause it's been so long, maybe we could drive into the dawn. Speeding up, blowing out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to forget. We could go nowhere. Give me more hours of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to escape. Let's go nowhere. We could go nowhere. Got nothing inside, wanna watch the world passing by. With you by my side, maybe this ride could make things right. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to forget. We could go nowhere. Give me more hours of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to escape. Let's go nowhere. Gotta wish tonight, baby, please set your thoughts aside. 'Cause it's been so long, maybe we could drive into the dawn. Speeding up, blowing out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to forget. We could go nowhere. Give me more hours of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to escape. Let's go nowhere. We could go nowhere.
Hi, everyone. We are live. Welcome to the webinar on retention, how to protect your investment in great people. So something is actually happening in the world right now. We all know that. We have something people call the great resignation. Others are calling it the great reshuffling because people are not resigning. They're just quitting their job at a record pace. So my name is Pernille Hibbebrun and I'm the CEO of Session. I am really, really happy to see this many people dialing in from all over the world. Please say hi in the chat and tell us where you're dialing in from. I forgot to mention in my welcome that we have actually Sonali also here dialing in from India, but you will get a chance to introduce yourself in a minute, and then you could tell everyone watching a little bit about yourself and why it's very relevant to have you in this webinar. For me, it's because all of you are actually people who represent a perspective of how to retain people in organizations of today. Dorte is with Bain & Company, and she has the perspective of having headed up a large part of the organization for years within talent development and attracting people. So she has that perspective, as well as some others that she'll tell you about in a minute. Doc has a perspective of being part of the founding story of Morningstar, the self-managed company led out of California, tomato processing, leading within that, and having approximately 3,500 people working without managers. So that's a pretty interesting story. And today, Doc is advising people all over the world within this self-management way of leading organizations. And Doc has so many perspectives on why this is a magnetic way to be in a workplace. Sonali is coach, and she's a leadership facilitator and consultant, and she also has perspectives from both the management side and the coachee client side, where she has a lot of stories from people on, what does it look like for a manager when people retire, and what could he or she possibly have done to maybe retain people, and also what does it look like from the client side when they actually are considering doing something else with their lives than staying in the organization. So I'm looking so much forward to hearing all the different perspectives and getting also some insights into, what is it that's going on? Why is this happening right now? So if we look at some of the numbers here, I only have a few numbers for you, but we have the numbers of 41% that's been mentioned in several articles lately. We have a record pace of people wanting to do something else in their lives and quitting their positions. And also we have a record number of open positions, giving us as an organization a huge possibility to rethink actually how we manage our organizations, because we need to attract talent in a different way, and also need to help our employees thrive and be happy at the work through that. But to help us discuss all of this, I want each of you to just briefly introduce yourself, and then we'll start digging in. And Dorte, do you mind starting introducing yourself?
No, I can do that. My name is Dorte. I live north of Copenhagen with my 2 children and 1 dog, and I really love the outdoor nature activities. So that's sort of a little bit just on me privately. Professionally, I am heading up the talent people efforts at Bain & Company in the Nordics, having responsibility for everything that has to do with our people, and have done so for many years. Been both a consultant myself, but also heading up sort of the internal part of a consultancy. So that's my background. Yeah.
Thank you, Dorte. And can you tell people, just for those who might not know what Bain is all about, a little bit about Bain as well?
Yeah, so Bain & Company is a global management consultancy located in many countries across the world, and we do strategic management consulting, in different industries, different areas, and so forth. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Dorte. And over to you, Doug. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Doug Kirkpatrick, and Pernilla, thank you very much for organizing this event around a very important topic. As Pernilla mentioned, I was part of the core team, the startup team of Morningstar. So 32 years ago, almost to the month, we started building Morningstar's first factory. And at that point, we adopted a philosophy called organizational self-management. Instilled that philosophy, embedded that philosophy in the culture, and the company grew from 0 to the largest tomato processor in the world with thousands of colleagues. And we've always had principles of self-management, autonomy, individual authority, decision rights distributed, and high retention rate. So I'll be eager to talk about that. Right now, I write books, The No Limits Enterprise, Organizational Self-Management in the New World of Work, Beyond Empowerment, I speak, write, consult with organizations and leaders all around the world.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug. And Sonali.
Hi. Thank you for the opportunity, Pernille. It's wonderful being here. So my name is Sonali Gera. I live in India. I've had a career in human resources. And about 6 years ago, I started my own consulting practice. So I do two things now. I consult companies on their leadership development, and I also do executive coaching for companies across the globe.
Awesome. So let's get starting. It's an interesting world we're living in right now. I think that's the best way to put it. Also, because if we look at who are actually quitting their jobs, so we're talking about retention. I just mentioned before that we're seeing a world record in people who are leaving their positions to do something differently, not necessarily to not work, but to do it in a different way. But if we also look at some of the numbers and what's going on out there, it's according to a range of studies, it's mainly women in their mid-careers, and it's mostly from the hospitality and the leisure and health industries that people are quitting. I'm just mentioning this because now when we are going to talk about this topic, let's keep it in mind that there is something going on in the world, and I'll come back to each of you and ask you, what is it you think that's going on, and how does that tie to your best practice recommendations in terms of how to retain people. So Dorte, the first question is for you. I would like to hear a little bit about your perspectives on how to build up retention strategies from a company perspective, and also maybe talk a little bit about talent development. Is that needed? Is it one of those practices that we can actually build on that will help retain people, or what's some of your best practice advice for retaining people in the world of today?
No, I thank you, Pernille. Good question, and of course one that's quite extensive question to answer. I think what companies must do today is really to understand, reassess their culture and their sort of their employee value proposition here after a pandemic. What is it that matters the most for the employees? What are the priorities of the employees? What will retain them in the longer run, and what will then be needed across what I call the entire employee journey, so that people feel that they belong to something where they can thrive, they are proud, and they can develop as human beings in a sustainable manner. And to answer your question, yes, indeed, I think people development at an individual level is critical. It's super important. It is what people are looking for, learning, progression, but also feeling valued in what they do, appreciated, and in a sustainable manner where they can also live sustainable lives and be whole human beings. So I think companies need to assess their culture and their employee value proposition and see where do we need to adjust things for our employees.
So in your company, and also what you see in other companies, is it deliberate that you don't call it talent development, or you call it people development? Is that deliberate, or is that?
No, it's for me, it's the same. It is people. It's all about it's human beings. It's about finding out how we can make people shine and how we can make them thrive and release their full potential in the companies in a good and sustainable manner that I know Sonali will speak more about, but in a manner where they can also care for their families, for themselves, and for having a full whole life. And I think those human aspects of work will be super important going forward.
More important than in the past, you think, or?
I think people are starting really to reflect now. So the why of why all of this is happening, I actually think people are, I would call it maybe the great reflection. So people are reflecting upon their lives. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Who am I? And what kind of life do I want to live? And how do I put myself and my strength best at use in this in this world. So I think it's a lot about reflection, and hence yes, that matters a lot, and sustainability, not in the world, in the world, but also for me as an individual. Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but I would also like to ask you, Doug, so self-management, is that maybe a potential possible pathway to creating organizations where people development is not necessarily something that leaders make sure happens, but more that it happens in a different way? And if so, how does that happen when people are self-managed?
So it certainly is about people working in a different way. It does have to start with leaders, though. Leaders have to create the context and the culture in which people can exercise their own management skills, their own autonomy, flex their own leadership muscles, and exercise the freedom to become innovative and lead themselves. What we found at Morningstar was that retention was really not a problem ever, because it was a seasonal operation. It grew to thousands of seasonal colleagues. And we found in measuring the results that we had years where we had a 100% return rate of seasonal colleagues from one year to the next, where they'd been laid off for 9 months. And the reason that was achieved, we found through focus groups, was that people valued the culture, they valued their autonomy and their freedom to a high degree, and they really valued their relationships. And so it was partly a social context that allowed them to, love their work and come back year after year after year, in some cases for 20 years or more. Harvard did a study, about 75-year study, and they followed hundreds of young people in the Northeast, and they found that the most significant factor in human happiness was not money or fame or even following one's passion. It was relationships. And so if you can create that kind of context for relationships, you can really create that cauldron of human happiness and joy and love at work.
And what was it that was done specifically at Morningstar to nurture relationships? How did that happen? Did it happen by itself, or what structures were in place to ensure that that could actually happen?
Well, the structures were probably no different than any other company. Annual company picnics, Christmas parties, things like that. But when people had the freedom to interact with each other, absent titles and position power, and the need to please one's boss, because there are no human bosses, and just having to get along and develop their own relationships on their own around key principles of not using force and honoring commitments and just doing good work. Those relationships evolve naturally, and they've been sustained for in some cases decades. And it's just great to see people come together year after year after year, and really making retention a non-issue.
It's really interesting, Doug. And I'm also going to come back to you in a moment, because I want to dig a little bit further into maybe some of those principles, but also some of the other things that you think is important for retention in a modern world perspective. But Sonali, I also have a question for you as a start. And you mentioned in your article that you wrote lately for Session, also something about work-life balance and managers taking seriously the needs of people to be whole beings. Can you talk a little bit more about what it was you meant by that?
Yeah, I think one change in phenomena that I'm noticing right now, especially with Asian clients, and especially with Asian, I would say, coaching clients, is that people are finding their identity outside of work also. A few years ago, we were all associated with our business card or our ID badge that we would wear to work. And now a lot of people are finding their identity outside of work. So people are reflecting on what's the purpose of their life, who are they outside of work. For example, there is this one person I know who she's a coaching client, and she said that pandemic gave her an opportunity because there was a lockdown, work from home, she wasn't going to office every day. It gave her an opportunity to watch a lot of YouTube videos and experiment with cooking. And she started this business of supplying food in her housing society. And if this business picks up well, she's contemplating quitting her job. And I said, why would you do that? Why can't the business and the job coexist? She said, because my manager is old school. He won't understand that. He would not want to accommodate my identity outside of work, in our professional life. While that's true for one person, another person shared that he actually has become a gym instructor. So 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., he's in the gym. He's a gym instructor outside of his regular job. And his manager is extremely mindful. The manager doesn't call for evening meetings. He says, we have to respect his gym hour. Now, it's anybody's guess which one's going to be attrition and which one's going to be retention. And I have many such stories to share, but I'm also interested in listening to what Daughter and Doug have to say. I'm going to keep coming in with my stories.
Thank you, Sonali. And just a follow-up question to that. What if it's not possible for the manager to grant the employee the benefit of, for instance, not having evening meetings or whatever else? What then do you suggest to do in a situation like that?
So my suggestion to the team member is going to be at least have a conversation. Talk about what your passion is. Talk about where do you find purpose and meaning. And a lot of times it may not all be at work, which is all right. Work is a part of our life. It is not our life alone. So I'm going to encourage the team members to talk about their passions with their managers. And I'm going to ask the managers to take a step back. Sometimes a lot is possible. For example, this is another coaching client of mine. She is the head HR of an organization. And she mentioned that one of the employees came to her saying, this is a very stressful job and I'm recovering from cancer. So I cannot do it. And this head HR said, all right, you tell me what you can do and we will craft something around that for you. We'd like to have you on board. So the team member came back with, I'm going to do this job. I'm not going to do this job. I'm going to work these many hours. I'm not going to work weekends. So she kind of created a bouquet for herself, and the head HR just had to decide if it's possible to get it done or not. What part of it is going to be possible. So there is going to be a lot of negotiation, but I'm going to ask both parties to at least open the negotiation, come on the negotiation table.
Yes. And maybe not even negotiation, but dialogue, right? Having, as you said in the beginning, a dialogue. So I want to open it up for all of you to chip in and keep on building on what we have already started discussing here. But considering, every organization has a limited budget, HR has a limited budget. And sometimes you can hear them discuss, should we invest in higher pay, better food for lunch, more days off, a ping pong table, or maybe even developmental opportunities, like Dorte mentioned at the beginning. So, what's your recommendation when you have a limited budget? How can you prioritize, and what's your call on this?
First of all, I want to say I'm super with Sonali on the if you have not had a dialogue, then how can you know if it's not possible? So I think and back to what Doug also said, this requires modern leadership. It requires leaders that will make that culture of trust and safety, where you can actually come and have dialogues and say what is it that I need as a person to thrive, and where can we find some common grounds, and where can we not. So I would say at least part of that budget should go into leadership development, or at least cultural development, saying, you know, what is it that we want of a culture in this company, and how do we nurture that, how do we role model that, how do we storytell around it, how do we showcase, and then we figure out that there might be a limit to certain things, but as Sonali said, there might also be things that actually are possible. So I think that's much more important than perks and compensation. Of course, that's a hygiene factor, and you need to be somewhere up there and match. But I think fostering that leadership and that culture would definitely be part of it. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
yeah.
to build on what Dorthe and Sonali has shared so far, the economic side of the equation in some respects is very simple. Some companies may just have to raise pay and pay people more, because people are making a cost-benefit calculation when they're deciding to leave companies. If your entire salary is going to childcare, for example, it becomes a question of why work at all? I might as well just stay home and raise my kids. So budgets are limited, but people do have a desire to learn. So learning opportunities can be made available within a certain budget, or you can give people freedom to seek their own learning opportunities, as long as they have some relevance to whatever the work content is. But the idea of expanding autonomy, freedom, and self-management is something that costs nothing. It's a decision. It's an act of will on the part of leadership. And so those kinds of decisions can be made. And it's actually magical what happens when you distribute decision-making in an organization, because when you start pushing decisions out to the edge of the organization, and people actually have the autonomy and the freedom and decision rights, then there's a sense of ownership that takes place. And with that sense of ownership is a stewardship and commitment and a sense of seriousness. This is important work that I'm doing, and that can contribute greatly to retention in organizations.
Yeah. So, but Doug, doesn't it cost something to implement a system of self-management?
Not necessarily. When we adopted self-management at Morningstar, our core team of 24 met in a trailer for 2 hours and adopted it. And at that moment became a self-managed enterprise. So we took decisions, and there was an inventory of decisions. They were distributed among all members of the core team. As the company grew, those decisions were distributed further, so that everyone has some portfolio of ownership of decision rights. So the cost, I suppose, is the cost of negotiating the ownership of decision rights. That's a cost that's borne by individuals involved in the negotiation. But all companies have that cost at some level in a self-managed enterprise. It's just that you're syndicating decision-making rather than having it emanate from the top of a hierarchical pyramid.
All right, thank you. And Sonali, you have anything to add here?
Yes, I really agree with the daughter when she said that investing in leadership development is really, really important. I'm also reminded of this coaching session that I had this week with a mid-level manager in a really large organization. And I'm saying really large because this person has been working in this company for 5 years. And he said that, I think I've got everything that the company has to offer. And I'm interviewing outside. And I was surprised. I said, your company is so large. You know, there are so many roles, functions, departments that you're yet to explore. And that's when I asked him, when was the last time you and your manager? So this person's already interviewing outside. You know, he's appeared for a few interviews already. And I said, when was the last time you and your manager had a detailed career conversation? He said, never. So now this is where I want to talk about daughter's point of leadership development. This manager needs to attend interventions around leadership development on how to have career conversations, how to retain, how to create a learning map for your team members. And the second thing that's coming up for me, I think coaching is an excellent investment for companies as a retention tool. Why? Because this person that came into coaching this week also said that he's feeling very demotivated, is not inspired. He was very inspired a few years ago, but right now, there isn't a purpose, there isn't any meaning in what he's doing. And I notice a lot of professionals find this purpose and meaning through coaching, because coaching actually helps them streamline their thoughts, just get the fog cleared and figure out what you really want. In fact, one of the organizations is actually using coaching as a retention tool where, they invite at a certain level, they invite their employees to come and opt in to a 6-month coaching program. And a lot of employees actually are so excited about it that they say that, oh, I missed it, in the fall season. I think I'm going to be due in the spring season. So this person's not going anywhere till this person enrolls into the spring season, does their 6 months of coaching. So companies are also trying to invest in people's growth and development to show them that we care for you. You have a career for us. You have a career with us.
It's very interesting. I'm going to come back to that also, because what then if you invest in people's development and maybe, even coaching, and they end up leaving you, aren't you left, at a worse place then as an organization?
What if you don't invest in people's development and they land up staying back? Then what do you do with mediocre lot?
You're laughing there.
That's one point, Sonali, for sure. But the other point is actually that with that flexibility we have in the workforce, with all the things that are happening in the world, I think of course some people will leave, and we will have to see if they come back one day, right? Because I see a workforce that will be much more sort of fluent in and out, and they might come back or come in as another capacity, and we want people to leave in a really good way if they are to leave. So the whole offboarding and making sure that people actually, one day might come back, or at least they have a super good experience with the company. And then, as I say, the flip side is even worse, right? And
it also ties into branding. Is that what you're saying?
Branding.
Sorry about the business you're in.
And then attraction of new employees, right? So when I say looking across the entire employee journey, for me that's all the way from the first day we meet somebody out there, whether it's at the university or in a job interview, so employer branding, recruiting, all the way through their careers, the learning opportunities, the jobs, the tasks, and all the way to the offboarding. What kind of experience do we want our employees to have across this entire life cycle with a company? And that's super important that they can sense and feel the values and the culture in all of that.
Yeah, interesting. I want to just show you a question that came in the chat. It's from Thijs. He asks, what do you do if the HR organization in your business isn't willing to be flexible around retention, even though you as a manager really wants to think with the employee?
I'm happy to take this question.
I can
because this did come up in one of the workshops that I had facilitated recently on leadership development. And I'm going to say that there are lots of things that managers can do in their individual capacity, even if they don't have HR's blessing. For example, this client of mine mentioned that in the North America, she's a director with a beverage company, alcohol company actually, and she said that the moment COVID struck, and the lockdown was announced in their country. They didn't have any support from HR on how to engage people. She said, I just called up somebody in the supply function and I said, here is the address of every team member of mine, and I'd like you to send them beer every Friday evening because we are all going to log into Zoom and we're all going to create our own bar on Zoom. Now, this is something the manager did to engage with her team, to retain them, to give them a sense of belonging in the middle of pandemic. There are people who are feeling lost. So for example, another client of mine, coaching client, mentioned that she's a single woman, lives alone, and pandemic has been brutal on her because her contact with any other human being was reduced to zero. Her self-esteem dipped, her productivity dipped, and she received no support from her manager. So I'm giving you examples of two managers. One manager who's sending beer on her own, saying, I'm here for you. We're here for each other. We're a community. And another manager who didn't even notice that there are mental health issues, right? So I believe a manager is like the CEO of their team. So there's a
Oh, yeah.
lot that they can do on their own.
Interesting. You have anything to add here, Doc?
Yes. So part of the challenge with the people with whom I consult is language itself, and so the term HR itself is challenging. People are not resources. So the term HR or human resources was intentionally dehumanizing. It came around in the 1970s and 80s as a replacement for the idea of personnel departments, so that we could set organizations up for all the reconfiguration that took place in the 80s and 90s, and the massive layoffs and the re-engineering. So people aren't resources. We talk about man hours as if women don't exist. We talk about head count as if people don't have bodies. And we talk about direct reports as if people are file folders. And it's very dehumanizing and disengaging. So if we're mired in the world of HR, that's like quicksand holding us back. And then beyond that, in my world, people have free will. And if you believe in free will and the power of choice, then that means people are responsible for developing themselves fundamentally. And it's no one's job to motivate anyone else fundamentally. And in self-managed companies, there aren't managers of other people because everyone is managing themselves. So that kind of autonomy that leads to retention and long tenures and engagement and all the good things, that's really kind of a different world than the traditional world of HR. And if this company has an HR department that's kind of holding back managers, that's a systemic problem in and of itself that should be addressed.
I am so with you, Doc, on that one. The HR word went out of my company when I joined 10 years ago. I said I'm not in HR, I am in people and talent. So if you want me to head up this, it's not with the HR word. And I actually see the narrative, the words we use, it is super, super, super important. So when we start this whole maybe reassessing or redefining our culture, it is really about thinking, what is it that we want to have? How do we explain this? What kind of words do we use? And yes, it is not to be seen as resources. It is to be seen as human beings. And I think that is what we see a lot these days, that people, they also want to be appreciated for who they are, and they want to see that what they do actually matters, and they want to feel that they are on a mission together with somebody. Back to your example, Sonali, I love it, of the beer. They want to, maybe we can't see each other physically, but we can do small Zoom parties. We can do. We have had small game nights, Jeopardy on Zoom. We've tried to engage with each other in a different way and stay close and actually also just use small text messages, small phone calls, just to say, hey, how are you actually doing? I haven't seen you for a few days. Are you okay? Right? So I think these are some of the simple things we can actually do to retain people so they feel seen and supported and sponsored in a way. And that's that's an effort that leaders need to take on. They need to say, I'm responsible for my team, both in terms of what we deliver, but also in terms of the relationship and in terms of people thriving and having their well-being in a good spot, right? And sometimes that means saying, we stop at 4 p.m. every day, or whatever we do, no, 4, that we do hard stops on the day, or whatever is needed for a period, right?
So it sounds like you all agree here that there's something about the language, there's something about having a way of talking about this that's more humanizing. And maybe to tie into that, we also have this question here about competences. So what can we expect of people in organizations of today? This is kind of what's also implied in this question here. So does distributed decision making require employees to have or to learn certain competences to even be able to function in a system that's maybe more self-organized?
I'd say yes. Every organization has an inventory or a portfolio of decisions that have to be made. Some of them can be predicted in advance. Some of them just pop up in response to markets and circumstances. But someone has to make those decisions. So the question is, who is the best person to make a particular decision? And decisions can be categorized as strategic or operational. Generally, strategic decisions are owned by CEOs or boards of directors, but operational decisions could be owned by anyone. And the question is, who's the best person to make a particular decision? The best person needs to be competent to make a particular decision. They have to have some subject matter expertise around the decision and know how to make a good decision, and in some cases who to talk to before making a decision. We call those decision rights. And so who are the owners of certain decision rights in an organization? If someone's simply not competent to make a decision, but they're performing a function that has value, that's great. They just may not have any decision making authority. So all these decision rights are negotiable and negotiated, but they can be widely distributed, and they have a direct effect on engagement and retention. I had a daughter that worked in a 10-person office, a nonprofit, and there were 5 layers of management, and every decision went up 5 layers and down 5 layers. You can imagine the latency and waste of time that occurred in a situation like that, completely unnecessary.
So what you're saying is that there are certain processes that can also ensure that even though not everyone has the same competences, you can still have a system that's self-sustaining by having the right processes in place.
Exactly. And in a self-managed organization, everyone is free to request ownership and initiate negotiations and discussions to acquire ownership of decision rights. And so it's a continuous nonstop sort of conversation that takes place inside the organization. But ultimately, people end up owning certain decisions, and in that case, there's really total transparency and accountability, because if you own a decision and something goes wrong with that decision or goes right, there's no place to hide. You are the clear owner of that decision. So it's very accountable that way.
Okay, I want to come back to something you mentioned before, Dorte, which was about the whole employee experience, and how we've seen lately that some of the retention strategies that companies are talking about is that exact employee experience and the life cycle of that, and maybe not so much benefits that only ticks in the moment you become ill or the moment that it's needed, but that you actually experience from day to day. So there's been some research showing that it's the overall day-to-day employee experience that counts. Can you talk a little bit more about what you meant by that? And Sonali and Doug, feel free to chip in.
No, I think it is back to the day-to-day experience. So do you feel, as Doug is saying, that you are maybe not self-managed, but maybe empowered to do what you think you should do. That you have the sense of a trusting, safe environment on a day-to-day experience. That you have the sense of somebody actually checking in on you and so forth. And that's of course very much in the company's values also. So and what kind of company? So is it a very innovative company? How is that whole idea generation going? What is the risk levels? How much can I do on my own? How much would I like to have others' opinions upon? But for me, the most important is to feel that I thrive in my day-to-day experience. I feel I have enough support around me. I feel that I can bring in people. I can tell them when I need help. I can tell them when I have a great idea, and I can voice my opinion. I feel included in a bigger community, and that I thrive in that. So that date, and that can be many examples of that. It can be, as I said, somebody checking in on you once in a while and saying, "Are you okay?" It can be feeling that we spend the time right on the right meetings that make sense with a clear agenda, and that we have a common sense of where we're going and what we are on a mission to do, and so forth. So it is that day-to-day employee experience that really counts. And for me, that starts day one when we meet somebody, and also in the recruiting, a two-way street, figuring out are we a good match? Is this both from the company side, but also from the employee side? Is this do we have the same beliefs and the same values, and can we see this match not only on competencies and skills, but also on our values, beliefs, and culture, and is there a full match there?
Do you have anything to add, Doc and Sonali?
So I want to bring in the idea of work-life balance. In the self-managed enterprise, we don't talk about work-life balance per se. We talk about work-life integration. And one of the best examples I've seen of that is there was a young woman leader of a business unit at the Apollo Group here in the United States, and they run the University of Phoenix, which is one of our largest for-profit universities. And she ran an IT customer service unit and wanted to become a self-managed unit. And so she brought together her leaders, and they started a book club, and they studied self-management and implemented it over 12 months. And at the end of that time, I got to meet with them, and they all told me almost to a person that embodying, adopting the principles of self-management not only benefited them in their work lives, but they were able to take the principles of self-management and realize the benefits of those in their civic lives, their family lives, their community lives. Every aspect of their entire lives got better as a result of adopting those principles. So they were very helpful at work, for sure, but also across the entire spectrum of their lives.
I'm just going to bring in also this question here from Florence Hart. How do you encourage people to own their own development rather than look to the organization to provide? So again, if we know that retention strategies are also about creating that connection with other people and providing growth opportunities from the organizational perspective, but how about people themselves? How much of this is their own responsibility, and how do you encourage them to own it?
I have an interesting example to share. I learned it from, one of the managers who showed up at my workshop. And he said that he started a practice called as the learning passport. So he got these passports printed, passport lookalikes printed. And instead of saying Indian passport, it said the learning passport. And he gave one to each team member and said, it's your job to own your learning. Every time you learn something new, whether it's a training you attend, it's a webinar, workshop, you shadow somebody else in another department, function, project, you participate in a cross-function project. So any form of learning, not that I watched a 20-minute TED talk and not that, but anything which you really, really consider as learning, you come back to me and you tell me you've done that, I'm going to stamp your passport. At the end of the year, we will see how many stamps each one of us has. And their appraisal discussions begin with this conversation. So, oh, you have so many stamps. Wow, what all did you learn this year? What is something you know today that you did not know last year? How's your career progressed over the last 1 year? Versus somebody who has 0 stamps. So, well, looks like you did not show any interest in your own learning this year. So please do something, come back, get it stamped, we'll talk again. Right? So that's one way. And I'm happy to learn other ways if anybody has any more ideas.
Well, that's a super colorful and wonderful example, I think, Sonali. I mean, mine is less colorful, I think, but sort of starting with the self-assessment, right? So actually providing that as the foundation of any appraisal dialogue or learning dialogue, starting with the self-assessment, saying, where were I 6 months ago? What have I learned? Where do I want to go? What is important to me? And then also really reflecting upon, who can help me here, right? I mean, in my company, we provide everybody with a formal, what we call PD mentor, so professional development mentor, that will help guide you on your development journey. But there might be other people out there that you need to learn bits and pieces from, and that whole apprenticeship model I find super useful, where you learn from other people who have tried it, and you give back what you can give to other people. But it starts with that self-insight and self-reflection on, where am I on my learning journey, and how can I, what can I bring to others, but also what would I like to learn from others, and where do I go from here? And that is then actually the starting point of that appraisal you are discussing, Sonali, saying that's the starting point. Yeah.
Great. So I want to emphasize that we now have 10-12 minutes left, and come back to maybe some of the best practices that you've seen from organizations. You mentioned Morningstar Doc, you've mentioned a lot of concrete examples that managers can do, and people, the people part of the organization, let's not call it HR anymore, can do. But do you have any other stories you would like to share, each of you, and things that you think will really matter in the future of retention?
Sure. And I'm taking notes here from Dorte and Sonali, because I love this passport and PD mentor. These ideas are really great. And to build on that, what your original question, Pernilla, was how much are people responsible for their own development? And my answer would be 100%. But the way we operationalize that at Morningstar is we created what we call the pathway, the Morningstar pathway. And it said, look, if you can find a willing mentor to help you progress to some desired future state, then great, negotiate a contract with that person and follow the path to success. And so we had a young man who was very ambitious, wanted to transfer from being a basic mechanic to being a high-end industrial electrician, and that's a big leap. But he was able to find a willing mentor, and they worked out a 4-year program. So he had to go take college classes and do on-the-job training and study videos and read books. But over 4 years, he achieved his goal and changed his life. But it took his willpower and his desire to do that. And no one's going to be a willing mentor unless they have some reasonable foreseeability of success in the mentorship. So it takes both sides of that mentorship to make it successful. But there are ways to do this even in organizations that are networks and don't even have career ladders or titles or positions per se. So there are a lot of great ways to achieve people's goals and help them progress.
All right. And what about technology? I know, Doug, you have some views on that in terms of retention strategies for the future that you probably would like to also touch upon.
Well, one of the interesting things here in the United States has been the impact on the transportation industry. So the trucking industry has probably 100% turnover. I mean, it's just incredibly high. Retention is very difficult. A person may sign up to be a truck driver on Monday, have an issue with the company on Wednesday, and quit on Friday. So it's a real challenging profession, and yet it's one on which we all depend for our lives, literally. So there's a company in the Midwest here in the U.S. called Workhound, and they've developed a mobile app technology that basically pings all members of a workforce and lets them provide feedback instantly, upon which a company can act. And this is one of the fastest growing companies in America. I mean, they grew 300% last year. They're growing exponentially because companies are seeing the value of being able to provide instant responses to workers out in the field and address their problems almost in real time. It's been a real game changer. They're looking to expand into, healthcare profession and other distribution and all kinds of other avenues because it's so successful.
That's very interesting. It ties very much into a question that came up in the chat as well. This question here, actually about how do you then make sure that people don't consider that an intrusion in their private life? You are all of a sudden, you are being sent notes, you are being checked upon, or you're being called upon, or maybe you have a daily stand-up meeting and stuff. How do you make sure, that does not become perceived as an intrusion? And
well,
maybe
Workhound is anonymous.
Yeah.
Workhound allows anonymity, so that's how they do it. But
okay.
No,
All right.
and I think it has a lot to do with empathy and intuition, so that done with care and with respect for the individual. There will never be a one size fits all on this, right? So some members of your team might want it in one way, some might want it the other way, but I think it would be hard if people does this with care and with love for the person and with the best of interest to see that it's an intrusion. But if you feel like that, you also have an obligation to say, hey, that's not what I need in my work life. This is what I need. I wanted to touch upon actually what Doug said before about work-life integration. I would call it, sustainable lives where things they do mingle together. So this work-life balance is for me a difficult concept because it is more of a sustainable life where everything works out in the best possible way. And there we see companies actually trying new things like a 4-day work week, right? Does it make sense to work 4 days full speed, and then you have 3 days of recovery and time with your family? We see companies trying things like nurseries and family care at the job to make that easier on families with small kids and sickness and so forth. So we see quite many of these initiatives being tested out in terms of providing sustainable lives for people. Yeah.
Nice. Do you have anything to add, Sonali?
Yeah, I suddenly realized that I almost missed talking about, work-life balance and flexibility and the role that plays in retention. So clearly, for many industries, especially, work from home was never an option. But I think pandemic just proved those industries wrong, and looks like it is an option for many, many companies, many industries now. And as things start opening up, right now India is going through the third wave of COVID. But I'm hoping that once things settle down, companies will have to make a choice. Do they want to go back to pre-COVID, context, or is there a 2.0 that they'd like to come up with? For example, one of the managers that I was coaching actually said, he's a first-time manager, And he said that his company, and this is before the third wave started in India, so everything seemed like things are settling, offices are opening, schools are also, going to open soon. So when that happened, his company actually said, so we're going to open up our office now. Everyone needs to start coming back into work. But all of his team members, coders, developers, software engineers, they're all people who'd gone back to their villages. They had reintegrated they had just reintegrated into the village life. So they were in cities. From villages, they went into cities. And then for 2 years now, they've been back into their towns, hometowns with their families. They're not going to come back. If you force them to come back, they're going to quit, because there's so many companies that are going to offer work from home. So I told this manager, I said, you'll have to make a choice. And I also asked him to think about, how did the team perform when they were working from home? Were there any gaps, significant gaps that you can think of? He said, no, their performance was fine. It grew first and then it reached a plateau, and that's where it was. So I said, then you'll have to make a choice that, do you really want everyone to come back at the cost of attrition? Or are you okay with a hybrid model? So some people can come back at a pay hike. So let's say 20% hike, whoever wants it comes back. You don't want your 20% hike, you stay back in your village and you continue to work. I think this kind of a flexibility is something that companies absolutely must, experiment with if they're serious about retention. Another IT giant, what they did in India was they actually asked every single employee, and they have hundreds of employees, to fill up a form where the employee chooses that, basis my life context, I want to permanently work from home, I want to do a hybrid model, or I want to come back to office as soon as the office opens. And then they have a conversation with their manager and they freeze, the deal. So yeah, that is one thing I want to talk about. I'm also mindful of the time, so
Exactly.
I'm going to keep quiet for now.
So basically, I think we could go on forever, but I want each of you to just make some final comments to wrap it up. We have another great question from Thijs, who would like for you to elaborate more about the work-life balance. Is it more like, his question is basically, do the panelists feel it's more about strict separation of work and personal time, like 4 days a week, or is it a more sustainable way? And I think you touched upon both. Actually, if we listen to what you said, maybe you can comment on this in the end here. We also have a comment from Tarun, who says, many a times an organizations hire and retain people aligning with the vision and strategy, but while the expectations and budgets are larger than life, but the remuneration for the people are not. So that we have so many great comments out here that we would like to also touch upon. We cannot do everything today, but we're going to follow up also on the questions. But just to give you a final 5 cents on best practices of retention, good advice, or what's just in your heart right now, please do so in the last 10 seconds each or something like that. Dorte, would you like to start?
Oh, that's super difficult, Pernilla, in 10 seconds, but I think it's been very, thank you so much for setting this up. This is a super, super interesting and important topic. I think for me, I'm sitting with that, balance of, how we must provide that flexibility. We must look at individuals and what do they need to thrive. We also must find a way to create this community and sense of belonging and purpose, and we are in it together. And can and how do we do that if we don't see each other every day, or if we don't see each other at all, and so forth. And for the question, I think it's a blending, work and life will blend together, and so it's more about thinking, how do we make it sustainable? How do we make this work sustainable for people on the long run, so we avoid burnouts and we avoid people not thriving and so forth. And that's why some companies are starting experimenting with the 4-day work week, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Dorte. And Doug, your last comment of today.
Well, we've known for 20 years that working from home, it can be extremely productive compared to commuting and going into the office. COVID has now made that issue crystal clear. So organizations that double down on spyware and command and control are going to lose ground to the organizations that are able to give people their lives back and their brains back at work.
Thank you, Doug. And Sonali, you get the final word here.
Thank you. And I feel we missed talking about it a lot today, and that is stress and burnout, which is also an outcome of the pandemic, which is also a huge reason for people to move out of their jobs. So if companies and managers can just pay attention to this, just be more mindful. And I'm going to give one final best practice that I heard. One manager, what he does is something called as a blackout period, where he tells his entire team that you choose what part of the day is most critical for you in your personal life, and you don't want to log in for that period, and we'll respect that. So there's an Excel sheet, no questions asked. You know, somebody's blocked 9 a.m. to 9:30, 10 to 10:30, 11 to 11:30, you know, my children, I have to cook, aging parents, caregiver responsibilities, whatever, you know. So there is an intention that I'm asking everyone to keep. And here is an example of an action that a manager took to convert that intention into a reality.
Great, Sonali. Let's make that your last, the last comment of today. I want to end this by thanking all of you in the panel here. Thank you for showing up and providing your insights and perspectives on this important matter. And I hope to see all of you again soon. Thank you so much. This is the end of this webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Got nothing inside, wanna watch the world passing by. With you by my side, maybe this ride can make things right. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to forget.